I want to bring greetings from Peter Davison to all of you this morning. Peter had his surgery, his deep brain implant for his Parkinson's that took place on Friday. And I was in contact with Andrea throughout the day, and I know a whole bunch of you were praying for them, and we told them we were praying for them, and Andrea said, the doctors didn't, the very first time around, they didn't have to do any great deal of exploration. They knew exactly where to place the implant, got it right on, and the process all went very, very well, and Peter's doing very well, and they are very appreciative for all our prayers and for all our love. So some good news this morning indeed. So continue to keep them. Peter will probably be in the hospital for a couple of days still until he comes home, I think, on Tuesday. Inshallah, as our Muslim neighbors. Isn't that a lovely phrase? It's like Lord willing, Allah wills it, so inshallah, on Tuesday he should be home. And just on another note, we extend our heartfelt care and love and prayers to Wendy and Ann Lebo, whose father died just over the last few days. So hold these couple of gals and their whole family, their precious part of our community, in your hearts and prayers too, please. Malcolm Sinclair, who is one of the shakers and movers in the whole movement of enabling the Canadian culture to recognize Aboriginal rights. His quote is in the bulletin this morning. He's saying, it's time for us to, the Aboriginal, the indigenous people of this country have prepared a pathway up a mountain, and it's time for us to climb. And therefore, time to climb a mountain. And when we get up to the top of that mountain, we're going to discover an incredibly beautiful vista. So we're going to hold this picture just up for a little while to remind us of that truth. Over the last few weeks, I think we were in a staff meeting, and Rick and myself and Jen and Lauren and April, and we got talking, as we sometimes do, about upcoming themes that we should discuss. And I think it was Rick who actually suggested, with everything going on down in the United States. This was about the same time that the Cornwallis statue was in the process. All that debate was going on here in the city, and you'll remember that debate followed a similar debate in the United States about the removal of Confederate statues in the United States. So we were thinking, it might be appropriate for us to speak about this particular issue here in Canada and here at home as well, because it's a significant part of our culture and what we're struggling to come to terms with at the moment. And this is also the first Sunday of Lent. And Lent is a time of exploration, and time is a time of real discovering how God is calling us to a deeper kind of consideration of how we can be followers of Jesus in the world today. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about. But Anne, it's great to see you here too. Ann Burden is with us this morning as well, and I just want to highlight as well that Ann's son Jeffrey passed away quite unexpectedly with sort of a week and a half ago, which is why I wasn't thinking about it this morning, but we just did Jeffrey's celebration of life service, and you're in our hearts and prayers as well this morning, and so just hold this very special lady in our community as well in your hearts this morning. Lots always going on in a community, right? So, as a result of our staff meeting, we decided it was probably a good time to talk about this particular issue in the United Church of Canada's response to how Canada is dealing with its relationship with Indigenous people in this country. And with regards to this Cornwallis statue, there were a couple of letters to the editor in the Chronicle Herald that I thought were kind of good, that I wanted to read for us this morning. And the first one is from Frances Ann Holodoff of Church Point. And she says, in the letters to the editor, now just consider, everyone, the time, energy, and money that it takes to erect a statue. That's a good question. Take a moment to think about that. Then remember how Saddam Hussein's statue was toppled. Do you remember that little piece of history? As well as those of the discredited politicians and generals of the Confederacy in the United States Civil War. I hope, she says, that our younger generation, this row right here, is paying attention. People are fallible. All of us. We're all fallible. I don't think any of you are yet. You don't recognize that yet because you're still young and you're on fire for the world. But people are fallible and probably shouldn't be venerated. And her suggestion is memorialize our heroes with songs, poems, and songbooks and storybooks. Then if they should fall from grace, it's not such a big deal to remove their statues, right? Well, that's a good comment, right? Good comment. And then there was this letter from Joe O'Brien, who is, I guess, from Halifax, and he says, statue removal signifies racists will no longer be honored here. Okay? We should honor, and I love this comment, we should honor people who transcend their time. And he's quoting, he says, wisely writes one of your readers. Then he goes on to say, from 1748 to 1761 in England, Lord Halifax was president of the Board of Trade. And the members of the Board of Trade were directly involved in the slave trade. Consequently, 12 members of our municipal council should perhaps lead a movement to change the name of Halifax to Wilberforce, who was the great emancipation proponent of the time. Should we take that up? We'll change Halifax to Wilberforce. I thought that was a really neat comment, though, that he actually quotes that the people we venerate, the people we really lift up as our heroes, should be people who transcend their times, who don't necessarily represent their times. And that is why, as a Christian faith community, our hero is, all together, 1, 2, 3. Our hero, you get another chance. 3 strikes and you're out. 1, 2, 3. Who is our hero? Jesus. Very good. Give him a big hand. Jesus. Jesus is our hero. Because Jesus didn't represent the ideas and the thinking of his culture in his day and age. He transcended the ideas and the thinking of his culture. He radically transcended them, and he represents to all of us God's vision for how human beings will live together, which is since time immemorial. You think about the very insular and self-contained and actually fairly, you could say, racist culture in which Jesus lived. And Jesus tells stories about the Good Samaritan, a person who wasn't a member of his race and culture at that time. He tells stories about the Syrophoenician woman, again, not a member of his culture or his time. And he lifts these people up as being examples of God's compassion and love for the world. So what Jesus represents powerfully in the gospel is a vision that is eternal, that transcends all time, that says God's Spirit can live through anyone of any culture, of any race. God loves all human beings equally because all human beings, regardless of your skin color, your race, your ethnic background, your belief background, every single human being is an expression of God's life in the world and is loved by God and can manifest the light and presence of God in the world. It's not rocket science. We're kind of used to it. We talk about it all the time. But in Jesus' culture and day and age, that was a radical, time-transcending message. And the letter that we heard from with Paul this morning that Bruce shared with us, And Bruce, at BUC, you always have to be prepared for the unfamiliar. You always have to be prepared for something new happening. So just take that into account. So I love you too. So when Paul says that God engages through Christ in a process of constantly trying to reconcile the world to God's self, what Paul is saying is that God is constantly trying to pull human beings back to to God's vision of how we are called to live in the world and how we are called to see one another and to live together. It's this constant process of reconciliation. Now, here's the point. The church, now have any of you, so I'm going to put you all on the spot again, have you all discovered this, read Genesis? This is my way of keeping them awake between sermons here. So, for all of you, have you discovered that the church is infallible? It's not perfect. Is that true? We're an organization, right? We're an institution. We're not perfect. We never will be, right? But the message of Jesus and the demonstration in Jesus' life is like this constant corrective. It constantly pulls us back. We get off track, and many years ago, Danielle and I went down to Guatemala, and on behalf of the United Church of Canada, we were invited to go down and to meet with the Mayan, the indigenous people in the Presbyterian Church of Guatemala. And what was going on in the Presbyterian Church of Guatemala at that time was outright blatant racism. And there were members in the Presbyterian Church who were basically turning on other members in the Presbyterian Church who were members of the indigenous community. It was an awful situation. Racism can exist even in the church, and has been, and slavery was supported by the church for many years as well. But there is constantly in the message and example of Jesus this corrective that pulls us back to the true way in which God calls us to live our lives. And the United Church of Canada hasn't been perfect either, but that corrective has constantly called us as well. And that's why in 2007, when the government of Canada instituted I'm just trying to think, what was it? It was the big settlement. It was the IRSSA, the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement, which was initiated in 2007. And then, so the United Church of Canada supported that wholeheartedly. We didn't hesitate one bit in terms of, and the government was looking for financial support from the churches as well, and the United Church of Canada put millions of dollars into this kind of process of reconciling with Aboriginal and Indigenous people within our own midst. And then in 2008, emerging out of that, that's the first settlement, the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement. That's out of that in 2008, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was started, right? And the United Church of Canada was actively involved in supporting that, got right behind the commission's work, toured across the country in support of the work. And then in 2015, of course, when that work came to an end, the federal government started the National Inquiry for Missing and Murdered Women, and the church has gotten right behind that inquiry as well, right? So the United Church of Canada has constantly, and as have other churches, has recognized the corrective over time that Jesus constantly brings to our way of being together in this world and calls us to a different, corrected relationship with our Aboriginal peoples as well. The United Church of Canada actually inherited the residential schools from our forebears. What year was the United Church of Canada created? 1925, very good. So the United Church of Canada was started in 1925 as a result of the union of Methodist and Presbyterian and Congregationalist churches in the country. And those three denominations had responsibility for 12 residential schools. The Roman Catholic Church, the Anglican Church, and And those churches together had about 80 residential schools that they were responsible for. And the United Church of Canada inherited, when it was formed, from the joining of the Presbyterian, the Methodist, and the Congregationalist churches, about 12 of those residential schools, okay? And along the way, as the United Church of Canada was managing these schools on behalf of the government at the time, it started to recognize that there were lots and lots of problems in the residential school system. There were about 130,000 kids who went through the residential school system, right? And it originally started with the churches and government leaders. Originally, it was probably initially begun with relatively benign sort of motivations. I mean, there was a desire originally to help educate indigenous children in the country, to provide them with skills that would enable them to find work and to be able to make a living within what had now become a dominant culture, okay? And so the churches got behind that effort. But part of the problem was that it was never appropriately funded. It was never sufficiently funded. And between the 1890s and the 1950s, the government of Canada tried to put more and more responsibility on the churches. But the problem with the churches was they never had enough money for food. They never had enough money for really good teachers and leaders within the system, so that lots of kids experienced malnutrition. The schools were often overcrowded, and that overcrowding put stress on the people in the system. And what happened then, there was often excessive punishment of kids in the system. In addition, there were some bad apples in the system who engaged in violent abuse and sexual abuse of children as well. And there was also what the children experienced was a real denigration of their culture and spiritual background, okay? So for the 130,000 kids who went through, 3,200 of the kids actually died in the process, okay, going through the residential schools. And they died as a result of malnutrition. They died as a result of influenza and tuberculosis. And as the church started, the United Church started to see this and started to have problems in its own schools, it eventually tried to get out. And by 1948, the United Church of Canada was trying to get out altogether. And by 1969, we closed our last residential school altogether. So the church has embraced that corrective of Jesus and started to make a difference. And I think that the church and the United Church was one of the most advanced churches, was one of the first churches to really start to address the issues that were problematic about the residential school system. And so in 1986, the United Church of Canada decided at that time that, and we were helped by indigenous people within the church who were so compassionate and discussing these issues with people in the church. And so the United Church of Canada at that time decided that it would actually make a formal apology to the indigenous people who had gone through the residential school system in the United Church system, that it would make an apology to the people and then try to follow up that apology with actions. And it's actually an interesting little piece of history in my personal life, because it was in 1986 that the church issued this apology to the indigenous people who went through the residential school system in the United Church of Canada, and that took place at a General Council meeting in Sudbury in 1986. And I was on conference staff in Manitou Conference, which is where Sudbury was located. And one of the things that we did was the church asked Art Solomon. Have any of you heard of Art Solomon? He's a well-known Anishinaabe, Ojibwe spiritual elder. And he's deceased now, but he was a wonderful spiritual elder in Northern Ontario at that time. And Art Solomon was asked by the church, and he took on a project of creating a really huge memorial cairn on the site of Laurentian University in Sudbury, Ontario. And I was on conference staff at that time, and Art invited some of us staff to come and help build this cairn with him. So for a number of days, I and some friends, we went to the site of this cairn, which is a lovely, large, circular rock formation with a cairn in the middle. And Art Solomon taught us absolute novices at anything. I knew nothing about laying stone and pouring cement and all of this kind of stuff. And he invited us and he taught us lessons in pouring cement and laying stone. And we also absorbed the incredible humility and some of the teachings that he shared with us around Aboriginal culture and spirituality at the same time. It was just a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful time in my life, and a real learning and developing an appreciation for the Aboriginal peoples of our country at that time. And then, of course, when that was created, the General Council met in Sudbury in 1986, and then they issued this wonderful, wonderful apology. And let me just share with you the words of that apology, because they are quite profound. The apology says, it was offered by the moderator at that time, the Right Reverend Bob Smith. And it goes like this. So this is from the United Church of Canada. This is to the Aboriginal people who have been part of the United Church of Canada, but it's also to the Indigenous people of Canada at large. Long before my people journeyed to this land, your people were already here. And you received from your elders an understanding of creation and of the mystery that surrounds us all, that was deep and rich and to be treasured. We did not hear you when you shared your vision. In our zeal to tell you of the good news of Jesus Christ, we were closed to the value of your spirituality. We confused Western ways and culture with the depth and breadth and length and height of the gospel of Christ. We imposed our civilization as a condition of accepting the gospel. We tried to make you be like us, and in so doing, we helped to destroy the vision that made you what you were. As a result, you and we are poorer, and the image of the Creator in us is twisted, blurred, and we are not what we were meant by God to be. We ask you to forgive us and to walk together with us in the Spirit of Christ, so that our peoples may be blessed and God's creation healed. That was an apology by the United Church of Canada to the Indigenous people of this country with respect to the way we haven't respected their culture and the depths of their spirituality. In 1998, we went on to give another apology. And this apology was with regard to the pain and suffering that Indigenous people actually experienced in our residential school system. And this was given by the Right Reverend Bill Phipps in 1998. How many of you remember Bill Phipps? He was a rather controversial moderator, and he was a wonderful person. He says, as moderator of the United Church of Canada, I wish to speak the words that many people have wanted to hear for a very long time. On behalf of the United Church of Canada, I apologize for the pain and suffering that our church's involvement in the Indian residential school system has caused. We are aware of some of the damage that this cruel and ill-conceived system of assimilation has perpetrated on Canada's First Nations peoples. For this we are truly and most humbly sorry. And the apologies goes on from there. So the United Church of Canada has quite a history of apologizing. They put a lot, the church went on to create structures within the church that support Indigenous self-governance within the United Church of Canada. The church also put a lot of money into the process of coming up with a settlement for the people who went through the United Church's residential schools as well. So the United Church of Canada is an organization you can be quite proud of. We've done an awful lot to try and reach out with reconciliation with the Indigenous people of the country. But the key thing is, what we've been very aware of, as with Art Solomon, they have reached out to us first with a real sense of open-heartedness and forgiveness and compassion that has enabled this process to take place so much more effectively. In 2012, the church did another quite a significant thing to represent a totally new relationship with the indigenous people of this country and within our midst. And that new thing was the creation of the crest of the United Church of Canada. And this is the older crest, and we're going to show you the new crest up here. So what you have up here, do you recognize this crest? So the church has changed this crest, right? And the changes in the crest, let me just tell you. So the burning bush is on the right-hand side represents the Presbyterian Church originally. The Bible represents the Congregationalist Church, and the dove represents the Methodist Church. Okay, but originally it was all the same colors. So what the church did is that it implemented 4 colors, the colors that are significant to the Aboriginal peoples of the country, right? And do you know what are the colors? The 4 colors represent the 4 directions for the Aboriginal peoples of the country, right? And so what are the 4 colors? What do they represent? Do you know? So white represents north, and yellow represents east, red represents west, and black represents south, okay? And on the crest, on the outside, you'll see ut omnes unum sint, which is Latin for that all may be one. And so what the United Church of Canada also did on the other side of the crest, it included the words, and let me, because just to read them, Aquae nia tatawa neren, which is Mohawk, and I guess Mohawk was the language that our Presbyterian forebears originally hooked up. Those were the first people in Canada that we were involved with. And the Mohawk words state, let me see, that that represents all my relations, okay? All my relations. So it's that all may be one, and all my relations symbolizes the same thing, that we all live within a position of unity with one another. So the United Church of Canada has implemented a new crest to suggest that we really are, we are united, we are reconciled, we have to recognize that the indigenous peoples were here first, and they have invited us into our lives, and our lives are now thoroughly integrated with them within the church and within the wider culture. So the challenge for us as a church, and we've made many steps as a church, but as a culture, as we move forward now, and now we have the ongoing inquiry into missing and murdered Aboriginal women, and there are other actions that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's work also has suggested, and we're going to talk a little bit about that next week. But as Mr. Sinclair has said, the Aboriginal people have reached out to us as a culture and as a church. He says they've provided a pathway, and they've shown us a pathway that we need to climb to really come together as a single community in this country. Our job now is to really climb that path together. And that is something that our church has been doing for some time and will continue to do as we move forward into the future. The Spirit of me honors the Spirit in you and in our wider church in its efforts to recognize the Spirit within the indigenous peoples of this country, and they in us. So be it.
Do you know the term settler that's being used in Truth and Reconciliation work now? If your ancestors were European or Europeans, then you are a settler, right? So it's a way of saying, my ancestors were not here first. My family settled Canada. So you'll see that word in our prayer song here, and I just thought I'd flag it for you, just in case it's new for some of you. Rick Gunn is a settler. My ancestors are Scottish, a little French, a little English, all European. We were not here first.
some suffering unrelieved. Condemn not my insensitivity. Forgive me, God. If I'd insisted on a peaceful life, far from the struggles that the gospel brings, when you prefer to guide me to the strife, forgive me, God. Receive, O God, this ardent word of prayer, and free me from temptation's subtle snare. With tender patience, lead me to your hand. Amen, amen. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a sinner like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a sinner like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see.
Thank you, Regenesis. You bring such beauty and depth to us every time you sing. Thank you. First Sunday of Lent, we always join in our sacred meal, the meal of communion. And we invite you to join us in that meal this Sunday as well. This meal, Jesus celebrated the Passover. But what the meal really represented for Jesus is something that came through in his teaching time and time again. Jesus spoke in many of his parables and his teachings about the meal being a place of hospitality. The meal is a place where everyone is welcome to God's table. You remember the parable where Jesus has a wealthy landowner who puts on a big banquet and invites all the friends, and none of the friends show up. And so Jesus says, go out into the streets and the byways and have everybody come to my table. Nobody is going to be excluded. We are all welcomed to this table. All human beings are welcome at this table. That's the whole point of the table. At the table, hostilities cease, love and conversation and joy are born. So as we come to this table this morning, I invite you to reflect on how God calls us to be invitational to the world around us, to be invitational into the good things in life and culture and in our world, that all may be one, that all may share together. Remember, this is a joyous occasion. It's also a sacred occasion. And so try to hold that sense of sacredness and joyousness in tension in your hearts and as you come forward to receive this meal. It's a time not so much for just conversation, but a time for reflection and pondering the significance of what we're about here. I'm going to invite our servers to come forward, Shani and Allison and Gloria. Will you please come forward, and we'll break the bread and pour the cup, and then we'll invite everyone to the table. Gloria. At Bedford United Church, as at God's table. Doesn't matter what religious tradition, spiritual tradition, or no tradition you come from. If you yearn to be touched by God's Spirit as it was reflected in Jesus, you're welcome at this table. We have bread. We also have rice wafers for those of you who have gluten intolerances or wheat intolerances. We'll have a wafer available for us as well. My friends, one loaf for one people, all of us, God's people, the bread of life. Thanks be to God.
And the night before Jesus was betrayed, he took the cup. He poured, and as I pour this today, I ask you to remember that as Jesus poured it, I pour it, and I remind you that it is the cup of blessing and God's love being poured out for each one of us through the life and example of Jesus. The cup of blessing.
Let's pray. Wonderful God, we invoke your blessing upon this meal, that it may be a source of nourishment and joy and encouragement to each and every one of us as we seek to demonstrate your inclusive love through our lives, just as Jesus did. So be it. Amen. We'll invite Regenesis to come forward first to receive the meal once we have stepped down, and then come forward by the middle rows, take a piece of bread, take a cup, eat and drink, and return to your seats by the side aisles and place the cups in the baskets as you go back to your seats.
Where two or three are gathered in my name, I am there, I am there. Where two or three are gathered in my name, I am there, I am there. Where two or three are gathered in my name, I am there, I am there. Where two or three are gathered
anyone need to be served in the pews?
How deep the peace, the confidence of those whose wrongs are forgiven. How deep the peace, the confidence of those whose hearts are healed. How deep the peace, the confidence of those whose wrongs are forgiven. How deep the peace, the confidence of those whose hearts are healed. How deep the peace, the confidence of those whose wrongs are forgiven. How deep the peace, the confidence of those whose hearts are healed.
Let us pray. Wonderful God, as we experience this banquet of sustenance and joy and depth that you provide to us through the life and ministry of Jesus, may we be reminded that you call us to provide this banquet, to extend the invitation to the whole world. Go forth with us, shine through us this day and always. In the name of our brother Jesus we pray. Amen.
Let's rise as we are able. Go out singing. 1, 2. You shall go out with joy and be led forth with peace. The mountains and the hills will break forth before you. There'll be shouts of joy, and all the trees of the field will clap their hands. And all the trees of the fields will clap their hands. The trees of the fields will clap their hands. The trees of the fields will clap their hands while you go out with joy. You shall go out with joy and be led forth with peace. The mountains and the hills will break forth before you. There'll be shouts of joy, and all the trees of the fields will clap their hands. And all the trees of the fields will clap their hands. The trees of the fields will clap their hands. The trees of the fields will clap their hands while you go out with joy. You shall go out with joy and be led forth with peace. The mountains and the hills will break forth before you. There'll be shouts of joy, and all the trees of the fields will clap their hands. And all the trees of the fields will clap their hands. The trees of the fields will clap their hands. The trees of the fields will clap their hands as you go out with joy. Shall go out with joy and be led forth with peace. The mountains and the hills will break forth before you. There'll be shouts of joy, and all the trees of the fields will clap their hands. And all the trees of the fields will clap their hands. The trees of the fields will clap their hands. The trees of the fields will clap their hands while you go out with joy.
He did it last week too. He looked at me. Okay.
God, let us be reconciled and corrected by the gospel and the example of Jesus, and look at our personal relationships as we go out this week with the indigenous people of this country to seek healing and forgiveness and true reconciliation throughout our week, and being in true community with our brothers and sisters in your name. Amen.
Amen.